Hi, everyone. This week for our independent reading, we're going to spend some time talking about how to review a book. And as we go through this, I just want you to understand that this week we are not writing a full book review, but we are going to be kind of surveying what we liked and didn't like and our opinions about our books and why we felt that way, because we are going to use that information to help our classmates so that we can crowdsource their new book selections. All of us are kind of finding new books and looking at new things depending on what we have in our homes or what we have access to. So, my hope from this activity is that you are going to be able to provide something that is useful to your classmates so that potentially they can use that information to choose a book that they might like to read. So, although we are not going to write a whole book review, this week's activity will have many elements of a good book review. So we're going to talk about what constitutes a good book review and go through these guidelines. Now, please make sure that you understand that these guidelines, although we're talking about books, there are many things that you could potentially review. People review restaurants, video games, movies, TV shows, and books. There are lots of different ways to write reviews and to share your opinions. So we're going to be talking about books because we're talking about independent reading, but a lot of these things could be applied to other kinds of review writing too. So you may be familiar with some of these techniques from other things that you've done or seen before in either my class or other classes. So the first thing we want to consider is author's purpose. When they're writing their book, and they're creating their characters, authors have a purpose, but also when people are writing a book review, they have a purpose. They're thinking about the major themes, the major ideas in the book, and they're evaluating the quality. Now, this is a really key thing because a lot of times people fall into the trap of summarizing the book, and that is actually not the goal of a book review. A book review's goal is to analyze the major things that are happening in that book and say whether or not they think they were done well. And here's the thing, guys, it's okay to say, I didn't care for this book. It wasn't great. I've read a lot of books that started off really strong and then something happened in the middle. I was like, oh, I'm really disappointed. But the important thing with a review is that you support that opinion with evidence. So your job is not just to say, oh, this book is boring, but why did you find it boring? Or this book was really interesting. And okay, but why? So find evidence or explain enough so that somebody understands why. Without giving away the entire story, we want to tell the reader why we thought it was a good book or not a good book. Now, again, there are more things that you could say about a book than it's boring or it's interesting, but it's just to give you an idea of how you could frame that. So maybe, if you say a book is boring, you want to say, well, it's because the characters are flat, they didn't really develop, I didn't see them have, like we talked last week with the elevator test, those real extremes of emotions. Or it was interesting because maybe it introduced me to a new fantasy world that had its own languages and its own cultures, and I found it really developed and really well done, and give some details about that. Here are some other things that you could consider when you're writing your book review. Okay, what is the story all about? So start with just those basic elements of, what genre, what kind of story is it? Maybe you could relate it to another book that you've read. So, if I'm reading a fantasy story, maybe I'm going to relate that to Harry Potter or The Hunger Games because I know those books. What point of view is the story written from? Do you agree or disagree with the book's overall ideas? So it might put forth some ideas that you are like, well, I don't know if I agree with this character or that train of thought. Are the events in the book clear? Sometimes things unfold from somebody's point of view, and that can make the book more impactful or it can make the book more confusing. What's the author's writing style? And is that writing style an effective writing style? Does it work in that book? Did you like or did you dislike the characters, and why? Some characters are written in a way that we're meant to dislike them, and other characters are written in a way that we're meant to like them. And was that effective? Did that work in the story? And also think about the conflict. So what's pushing the plot forward? And how was that conflict developed? And then was it resolved? And if it was that effective? Do you feel like it was well done and you understand all of the things that unfolded, and they went together well, and you felt like the book had a satisfying conclusion. When you're thinking about a book review, you want to consider the way to develop your ideas. So first of all, like in all writing, we're going to start with a hook that's related to your book that's going to draw in your reader. We talked a lot about different ways to approach hooks in our class, but there's a lot of different, ways to develop that start of a writing piece like this. So you could start with a quotation, a strong statement, maybe imagining, asking your reader to jump into the story. So there's a lot of ways that you could do that. You want to make sure that somewhere you include the book's title, the name of the author, who published the book, and maybe the price also. Sometimes people include the price. Certainly, if you're reviewing something and talking about its quality, if you spend a lot of money on a book, you might want to say, well, I didn't like this book and it cost me a lot of money, or this is a great bargain. And so sometimes people do that in a review. You also want to include information about the author. So if you know things about that author, maybe you've read other books by that author, or they're a very famous author, you might want to include that so that people are aware of that background information and maybe how it influences the author's writing or that particular book, or maybe the popularity of that book. And then really the core part of the review is discussing your thoughts and opinions of that book. So again, this is not a summary. You might mention those pieces of the story that are important for the reader to understand so they can understand your opinion, but you're really giving your point of view on what you read. And that can be positive, it can be negative, or it could be neutral. It could be meh. Okay, it was an okay book, but it wasn't my favorite. But this is the key part, guys. You've got to defend your thoughts by paraphrasing or quoting and explaining how those examples are sculpting your opinion. So how am I seeing that this book is just okay? Like, what about it didn't really get you? Or what could the author have done to make it better? And then you're going to conclude with a summary of your thoughts and your final judgment of the book, and you might even recommend it to a group of people. So think about who might like a book like this. So, I didn't love this book because it was about football, and I don't know a lot about football, but I think people who like football would like this book. Or this book is a fantasy story and it's full of dragons and wizards. So if you love books that are taking place in a fantasy genre or with a strong plot that's driven by action adventure, this is the book for you. Okay, so those are just some ideas to think about. So again, we are not writing a full book review this week. Instead, we are completing a survey of our book that contains elements of a book review. So when you go into the folder, there is a link for you to access the survey. And remember that the information that you put on there will be shared with your classmates. So if you are posting information, just be aware that other people are going to see that besides me. Okay? If you recently started a new book and you are not far enough in your book to feel good about reviewing it because you haven't gotten to the end, it's okay to do the one you just finished. Okay, so whatever book that might be. The goal of this assignment is to help your classmates choose their next book. So ideally, I'd like you to avoid books like Wonder or Harry Potter or The Hunger Games because most of us have read those books before. So ideally, this would be a newer book that is newer to you, newer to your classmates, or a classic book, but one that we haven't read in school already. Okay, so ideally you're looking for something new. Now, I understand that we're all in a situation where we might not have access to lots of different books at home. And so I've also linked that list of resources that I've shared with you before of ways that you can access digital books. So you can actually get a library card if you don't have one already and use the public library system to get digital books that come right to your phone. You can also do that through the Kindle app or through Audible, which is both of those are Amazon related apps. But there are also other websites where you can click on PDFs where people have scanned in whole copies of books the way that I do with the books that we read in class, and they have them available online as well. So I've included that in this folder. Use that material to help you if you are not maybe finding good books around your house, or you are not able to access what you want to read. And hopefully this will give you something new that you can enjoy over the next few weeks as we work on our independent reading. So guys, again, this is a marking period for grade. If you have any questions, feel free to jump into my office hours. I hope to see you online this week, and I hope you have some happy reading and reviewing.